Welcome to the tip channel. That is perfection.
Today we're going to take a look at building a beveled edge high pressure laminate countertop. Now, first of all, what is laminate? I will refer to it loosely a lot of times as Formica because people understand what I'm talking about. Formica is actually a corporation. There's a lot of different manufacturers of high pressure laminate out there. There's Formica, there's Wilsonart, there's Pionite, Avenite, Nevermar. The list goes on and on and on. But the product we'll be using today is manufactured by Wilsonart. The beveled edge molding is made by Wilsonart as well. Now I've got a piece here next to me, a scrap piece I had left over from a job, and you're probably not used to seeing it like this. You go out to a kitchen showroom and you see a countertop and you assume that laminate is 1.5 inches thick. That's not actually the case. Or you've seen it in a person's home and again you think that it's 1.5 inches thick. High pressure laminate is actually 1/16 of an inch thick, and its composition is that you have a top color sheet and then you have phenolic backers underneath of the color sheet. Now the top color sheet is what gives laminate scratch resistance. The phenolic backers gives laminate impact resistance. So if you drop things on your countertop and what have you and it doesn't dent, the reason it doesn't dent is because of the phenolic backers. Your top color sheet is merely for scratch resistance and nice appearance, of course. There's a ton of different colors out there, so a lot to choose from. The advantage of doing a beveled edge countertop is that we're going to make it ourselves. So we're going to eliminate some seams, number one. Number two, all the edges on the countertop are going to be beveled, so we don't end up with a lot of heavy black lines indicating that it's a laminate countertop. Naturally, there'll still be some next to the stove or next to the refrigerator or someplace like that. Now, we'll be putting that on an industrial board substrate. What's industrial board? Basically, it's a form of particle board with a whole different composition. Much smaller wood flake and a totally different glue composition. The product that we're using is manufactured by a company called Boise Board, and it is made specifically for doing countertops. So a lot more stable product, and like I said, 100 times better than what you're going to pick up at the lumberyard.
Our first step is that naturally we need to cut out our Boise board substrate, and we'll try to keep everything just as accurate as possible.
This is our main countertop in the kitchen. And basically what we're looking at is that this is actually 146.5 inches long. Now, the scenario is with laminates, they come in different size sheets. You can get 3x8, you can get 4x8, you can get 5x8s. The very largest sheet that you can get is 5x12. So we're a little challenged with this countertop because we're 2 inches over 12 foot. So how am I dealing with that? Well, first of all, the laminate will come in a little heavy. It may be 144.5, 144.75, but typically the sheet is a little oversized. So I've got my deck at this point at 144.5 inches. I've got a 1-inch backsplash down there. And over here I have a refrigerator. So I talked to the client about adding an in splash to this in, 1 inch. That gives me my overall dimension. What's the big win for this? No seams in the corner. So basically, had we been under 12, wouldn't have been an issue. But the additional in splash allows us to be able to do this in all one piece of laminate. Now, naturally, our board isn't that big, so we have a couple of seams. I've got one right here, and I've got one right here. Now, for my seams, Your situation with the industrial board is that there can be just a very slight differences in thickness, just depending upon where the board was stored at. Moisture content in the board can vary it just a little. So we're talking hundredths of an inch. We're not talking a 16th or an eighth, but there will be sometimes a slight difference in board. And actually, I want this seam to be perfect across the face of it. So what I've done is I've lined up my front, I've lined up my back, and this is our top side. And I stepped in about 3 inches from the edge and put a pencil line across both boards. Did that in the back as well. Then I added 2 more. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my biscuit cutter and I'm going to do a biscuit slot in both boards in those 4 locations. After that, I will take this board, flip it over, and do some pocket screws on the underside to draw everything nice and tight. So this will make a very nice flush joint. Now, if you don't have a biscuit joiner and you want to skip this step, you can take and staple and screw a piece of wood on the underside of this seam. But like I said, then you may be just a hair off on the top and you'll need to take your belt sander across it in order to smooth out that surface. But with the biscuit joints, that holds everything nice and flush. At this point, we've turned our board upside down. And now we're ready to assemble our 2 joints. Now, first of all, wood glue. Any good cabinet maker will tell you it's not the screws, it's not the nails, it's not the staple, it's the glue that holds things together. So what we'll be doing is that I have the 4 biscuits that we'll be inserting in between of the 2 boards, and then I went ahead on the underside and drilled Kreg pocket hole screws in. Now, I am fortunate that I have a Kreg pocket hole machine. You don't have to invest into that. I use this Kreg jig for years and years and years. You simply clamp it on the product and drill holes in it. So very simplistic, very affordable. So next step is we'll go ahead and get this glued up and assembled together. Now between the biscuits and the pocket hole screws, we're going to end up with a real good joint. Our countertop is still upside down, and now we're going to add our build-up strips to the underside of the countertop. Now, I typically do a 3-inch piece in the front that gets me inside to where I can screw into the build-up, and I do a 2-inch strip along the back side. The product that I'm using is a white melamine. The reason that I'm using this is that if any water drips over the countertop and hits this, this isn't going to be affected. So I'm using the white melamine, and I've scuffed up the inside of it with a belt sander so I get a good adhesion. And because I'm using the melamine, which is slick, because I'm using the melamine that has a slick surface, I'm going to use a Hilmi Bond 890. Now it's a little more of like a silicone based almost. It still cleans up with water, but for slick surface, great adhesion. So 3-inch strip along the front and a 2-inch strip along the back, and we'll be shooting that down with an 1 1/8" staple. Now you could use an 1 1/4", but you got to be a little careful as to how far your staple is penetrating. Don't want to come through the other side. That would not be good. To line up your strip, use a speed square, set it at an 1 1/8". Set your 2 boards up, line them up, and then feel it with your finger. Your finger can feel a lot more than your eyes can see. Do yourself a favor as well. Calculate where your sink is going to be. I've got it marked out, so I know my sink cutout's going to be about right there. And what I'll do is I'll watch my staple placement. I know that my cutout along the back is going to be about 3/4 of an inch off of the backsplash. So I'll keep my staples there about a 1/2 inch from the back. On my front cutout, typically I'm going to be about 2 inches back from the front edge of the countertop, and so I'll keep my staples within that realm. That way I don't have to worry about cutting staples when I go cut my sink bowl cutout. Now you don't have to use the melamine product. You can use your Boise board. If you do that, just a couple of tips is locate where your sink and your dishwasher are located. When people open that dishwasher door, that steam goes up and hits that edge of the countertop and will actually start to disintegrate the particle board. So to prevent that, if you're going to use the Boise board, go ahead and run a strip of laminate in the location of the dishwasher and the sink. And actually that'll protect the particle board product. Now we have our buildup on. A couple of tips. Speed square, as I mentioned, and filling it with your finger. After you have a piece stapled on, go back and check it. Again, fill it. If it's off just a hair, at this point you can take your mallet and tap it a little bit and get it right into place. So the staples will give just a little bit. Once the glue's set up, naturally it's stuck. I've also put my support piece over top of my seam and glued and screwed it. Now, if you're not using the biscuits and pocket hole screws, a little tip when you go to screw this down, when you go to drill your holes through this piece, if you go at a little bit of an angle, what happens is that as you start to screw, it'll pull that seam together. Now we have another area in the kitchen where the base cabinet was reduced in depth to 16 1/4. And we have an angle cabinet at the end, softening the flow coming in from the living room. So what I did is that I made a cardboard template. I took a piece of cardboard, I set it on top of the cabinet, and I traced it. So this is actually the underside of my countertop. Then what I did is I marked 1 inch out from that mark. That's the face of my board. It allows for the overhang. 1 inch on the overhang, 1/4 inch with the molding we're going to apply will be 1 1/4 inch overhang. So 1 inch mark out, and then I cut my template. So now what I do is that I take and I flip my template over, and now I'm on the top of my countertop. So this is the angle that I need. So before I cut that angle for that angle base, what I'm going to do is to go ahead and do my build up so that when I make this cut, this is going to be perfect. So instead of having to cut it twice, I'll cut it once. How did that turn out? I don't know, man. Maybe we'll see. We have one more piece of countertop in the kitchen that we're doing. And this is actually going on a cabinet underneath of a window. The window's lower. So this is actually a window seat on this piece of countertop. Now, this is coming into the kitchen area. So keeping in mind it's only 30 inches off the floor. It's not really up here at your eyesight, not really catching it. I don't want people to bump into this as they're coming in. So what I'm doing is what's called a clipped corner. I know that I've got 1 inch overhang, both on my left-hand side and also my front of my substrate material. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a 45-degree angle across that angle just to sort of soften that corner a little. Now we need to prepare our laminate for our countertop. This is a little difficult to get this through this table saw. I have done it. It is possible. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use this countertop as a template to router my laminate to the point where I'll end up with a couple small pieces to do my smaller pieces of countertop. First off, we need a 6-inch rip for a backsplash for this edge. So I'm going to cheat this countertop 6.5 inches past the edge of this, and then I'm going to take my router and run down it and create the piece that I need for my backsplash. We have our rip for our backsplash, and when I'm running laminate, I like about a 1 inch overhang all the way around. And then I'll take my router and route it right into the board once I have it stuck. But we need to prepare this for the countertop that we have underneath of this. What I've done is that I've cheated this side over, which is my backsplash side, 3 inches. And I've done the same thing on this side, 3 inches. So I'm going to go a little heavy because it's a big piece of top. Normally it's an inch. This will give me about 1.5 inches overhang. So these 2 sides are my backsplash. I've cheated out 3 inches. And I'll go on the outside now of my countertop and router that. Whenever I get ready to stick this, naturally this will slide that way 1.5 inches. All right, we are ready to start our glue up. We'll be using a Wilsonart 500 adhesive. It is a brushable adhesive. It's also available in a spray. I also make canisters of spray as well. But we'll be using a 9-inch roller and naturally a roller pin. Now, at this point, everything needs to be perfectly clean. Blow off all your cables, blow off your product. I even take a tack rag and hit things just to make sure that we don't end up with a lump underneath of the laminate. At this point, we have our board glued up and we have our laminate glued up. Now, what we're looking for is that window of about 5 minutes or so where the glue reaches a point that you can touch it with your finger and it doesn't come off. After that window, you've got half an hour, 45 minutes to actually stick this piece of laminate. Here is the thing about contact adhesive. It is named contact adhesive because the minute it makes contact, it's stuck. So you want to make sure that it's positioned correctly whenever you go to stick the laminate. This is a big piece of laminate, so we want to be very careful on the placement of it. So what I'm going to use is push sticks. And I've blown all these off. I've wiped them off real good to make sure nothing was left on them. We'll place these about 1 foot apart. And then we'll be ready to actually lay our laminate on top. I'll lift one end of the sheet up, pull my push sticks out, probably about 6 feet or so. Then I'll roll it up the other way and stick that side. Push sticks are out, and you can press this down with your hand, but you're not going to get the pressure that you will with either a J roller or a T roller. This is a J roller, and this is a T roller. Now, as you're applying pressure, if you're using the roller, be a little careful next to your edges. You don't want to roll off the edge or you're going to bust your laminate. Router our laminate back even with the board. And I'm using a laminate trimmer with a bearing bit. And what I'm talking about is it's got a bearing right at the end of it. I have the depth of the bit set just deep enough to where I'm going through the laminate. Now, one little tip, spray this bearing with some WD-40. It'll keep the glue from collecting on it, number one. Number two, eventually so much glue will get in there that it'll bind up your bearing. Now, a little tip whenever you're cutting laminate at your saw, I've got a scrap piece, 1/4 inch. I've tacked a board to the end of it. I'll put it right next to my fence. That keeps the laminate from sliding underneath of the fence. Now, on my backsplashes, naturally I make them long and then I'll cut them to size. But I also make them wider in height. I've cut them at 6, and basically what I'll do now is I'll cut them to the 4 3/4. What does that do for me? It saves me an awful lot of routering and sanding to make sure everything's perfect, because now that the laminate is glued to the board, I'll run it through the saw. I'll have a nice clean edge to attach things to. Now that we have our top routed off, we're ready to attach our backsplash and our beveled moldings. But one step before that is that I take a piece of 3/4 inch plywood or hardwood, and I take a sanding belt for a sander. And that, you see, it's nice and tight on that block of wood. And what I'll do is I'll go around the countertop and sand this. What this will do is, if there's a little bit of laminate glue left on the edge, or the laminate might be hanging over just a hundredths of an inch or what have you, it just smooths everything up real nice. So when you go put your moldings and your backsplash on, everything fits fantastic. Oh, sorry. What? It was the contact adhesive. Hey, what can I say? I love what I do. If I want to dance in my shop, I will. Back to the countertop, however. Now, most important step, silicone. 100% silicone. Do not use latex. Do not use the crap that they're coming up with that's partially silicone. You want 100% silicone. Now, what I've done is I've drilled along my countertop every 8 inches. Now, center of my bottom build-up piece, which is 3/4, is 3/8. So I did a pencil line at 3/8, and my top deck material again is 3/4. So the center of it from the bottom is 1 1/8 inches. So I go about 1 1/16 inches. I don't want to get too close to the top. And I drilled another set of holes 8 inches apart. Now, what we're going to do is we'll run a bead of silicone along that top line that I did at 1 1/16 inches. What we're going to see, what we're going to want to see, is the silicone actually ooze up out of the joint of the countertop. We need a good seal back there in the back. Don't want any future problems. So we'll do a bead of silicone. I'm going to shoot it with 1 1/4 inch staple, and I'm going to feel along the bottom to keep everything nice and flush. Now the staple is only temporary. Then we'll come through with a 2-inch assembly screw. Now if we just start to clean up the silicone, we're going to make a mess. We don't want to do that. So what I've got is a scrap piece of laminate, and I'll take the biggest part of the excess off, and then we'll clean it up with lacquer thinner. And finally, we are ready to start our beveled molding. Now, this product is made by Wilsonart, the same manufacturer that makes the laminate that we're using on the countertop. And actually, we've ordered it in the same color. I've ripped my backsplashes down to 1 inch. That gives me a 1/4 inch reveal in the back for scribing. Now you can get backsplashes for the countertops already. I prefer to put the molding on separately. The reason being is I can make all my turns and what have you, continue the molding, and just end up with what I feel is a lot nicer job. Now we'll be applying the molding with the Hilti Bond and strapping tape. So basically the process is that we'll glue the back side of the molding. Now we'll be putting a little more glue when it comes to the area where the sink is at.
and strapping tape. Now, if you find that the molding needs to go a little bit back from the front edge of that, you can tap it, but what you don't want to tap it going in straight, or naturally you can bust that fragile edge. What you want to do is beat on the bevel, but that is a way of adjusting it that does work. And we want to place this strapping tape about every 4 to 6 inches. Now we're at the front edge of the countertop where the sink and the dishwasher and what have you is going to be. And we know there's going to be a lot of water around here. So what I've done is a double bead of glue. And now I'm going to take a piece of laminate and spread that glue out. What I'd like to see is full coverage on that piece so that it really seals up whenever we put it together.
We're on day 2 of our countertop. The glue on our molding's set up overnight, so we'll go ahead and pull all of our strapping tape. Our next step is that next to my range area, I need to cap that in. Now I've left my molding run just a little bit strong. So I'll take my belt sander and sand that in even with the end, so I'll be ready to do my cap. They'll go around, we'll feel for any sharp edges. Any sharp edges we find, we'll use the smooth side of our laminate file and clean them up. We don't want to go too heavy. As I mentioned, we don't want a black line, but like I said, we don't want a sharp edge either. Now I'm going to be using 2 different routers on this cap. The first one is going to be a flush bearing bit, and the first thing you want to do is check your bearing. Make sure that the bearing's not locked up from some previous glue. If it is locked up, it will burn the laminate, so we don't want that to happen. Also, with this flush bit, what I'm going to actually do when I'm on my top of my countertop is I'm going to take and tilt up just a little bit. That way I'm leaving a little more laminate. I don't want to take the chance of coming down in the opposite direction and cutting into the top laminate. After I'm done with the flush cut, I'm using what's referred to as a no-foul router bit. Now, the no-foul, I'm going to see if I can get you to pick this up. Basically, it has a little bevel here at the end. So you can adjust it so that you're coming right down and you barely have to hit it with a file when you're done. Now that we're fairly close with the laminate, now we go into our file. Now, a laminate file has 2 sides. It has a coarse side, and then it also has a fine side. So we'll start out with the coarse side. And naturally, we still have a little bit of glue left on there. So what I normally do is I take a little bit of lacquer thinner and go ahead and hit that with some lacquer. And as I start to file, I'll also take some of that excess glue off. Now, with the file, never pull. You always want to push. So that's what we're after. In this part, you want to take your time, because if you get too carried away, you're going to cut through the top Keller sheet of your deck. And if that happens, you're normally going to get like a white line. Now, if that happens to you, you can take a permanent marker and touch that edge up a little bit. So you'll notice that on my coarse side, I went almost flat, and then when I switched to my fine side, I gave it a little bit of a bevel, just softening that edge. Our last step, now that we have filed and cleaned off our glue, is to take our belt sander. We're going to hit the back side and the bottom to get it nice and even with the substrate, so that as we're taking the countertop out to the job site, we're not going to take a chance of chipping the laminate that we've just put on. With our countertop complete, we're now ready to cut our sink bowl hole. Now,
remember that we use 2-inch assembly screws whenever we attach the backsplash to the deck. So I've switched those out to 1.25-inch screws. Typical double bowl sinks are 33 wide, 22 inches front to back. The cutout for them is normally 3/8 of an inch less all the way around. So the cutout dimension is 32.25 by 21.25. So we've marked that all out. We've triple checked everything. And now we're actually ready to start our cutout. Now I've stopped 1 inch short of the corner, and I'll actually finish this up with the jigsaw. But what I don't want is that I don't want this cutout to fall through. The reason being is that if that's at a little bit of an angle and it catches the edge of the laminate left on the deck of the countertop, you can't actually damage the laminate. We don't want that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take and put 4 assembly screws in. I'm going to screw into the cutout, about a 45-degree angle, and basically all this is just enough to hold that. Just a few more things to finish up my countertop. Number one is I'm going to take and add some sealer to the top edge of this molding here at the sink area and dishwasher, just so we don't have any issues with that. The second thing is that naturally our backsplash gives us a lot of strength, but this front edge we've only got a couple inches left. This countertop has to go in, twist, turn, what have you to get into the house. So what I'm going to do is to strengthen that, and I've got my premium 2x4, premium with bark still on it. Isn't it amazing what the industry gets away with? But anyways, premium 2x4, I'm going to go ahead and screw that to my front edge. That'll protect this from snapping, getting out to the job site. Once I'm out there, naturally I'll remove the 2x4. How did the countertop turn out? This is the tip channel. That is perfection. What? It ain't cocky if you back it up. I hope that you found this informative. If you did, please like and subscribe, and have a great day.